Tell you what, let's go on to the second question. Second question is, how does resident engagement influence your success in maintaining a sense of community? And Stephen, if you're okay, let's start with you.
Yeah, certainly. When I answer this question, I'm drawn back to stat that you threw out about 80% of folks not necessarily having been to a a local city council meeting and watching their elected officials work in front of them, and maybe even delegating or asking questions of them on particular matters. Um, I think that the reality is if we have more people coming to those city council meetings, that's obviously a good thing. But I would also challenge a little bit that by the time something's got to the city floor of city council, at least in our context, it's not a fait accompli. It's not done yet, but it's pretty darn close. It's pretty much near the end of a decision pathway, an engagement pathway. There's still an option to get some feedback, but it's on the floor of a council. It's on the floor of a decision-making body, and they're going to make a decision on it, perhaps that evening or that day, and that kind of thing. So I think I think the way that resident engagement has influenced our success in maintaining a sense of community is we try and use those engagement tools early on in the cycle. So we're contemplating ideas, we're having maybe different models or different potential pathways or options for the community to consider. We're vetting those through the community. We're dialoguing with the community on those different models and options, and then we're presenting those to council and allowing them to see, here's the decision, or here's the commentary that we've received from the community. I go back. I mean, my training is, I'm not an engineer. I'm not an accountant. Municipalities around the world hire a lot of accountants and engineers and planners and the like. I've got an undergraduate degree in political science and a graduate degree in public administration. So I'm very much a generalist, but classic public administration would say that good decisions come from when elected people get advice from professional staff and people in the sort of the bureaucracy or in government, and they meld that professional advice with what they're hearing from the community. And that makes good policy decisions, right? They find a marriage between those two things, and that leads to good policy. Well, that's incredibly important, and it does build community. It builds a sense of community, because if we engage early and we engage often, people can see the fruits of their labor in the decisions that elected people make on behalf of the community. And so I think that's incredibly important. And I think the pandemic has sort of thrust that at us. It's sort of said, you need to do this. You can't just rely on it coming to the floor of council for a decision making and give somebody 5 minutes at a mic and have 10 people show up and have their 5 minutes at the mic to say their piece. It makes that decision making a lot more protracted. Some of those decisions can be much longer. And I think there's an important to be able to scale the amount of engagement. I mean, important decisions that need to be made now often need to be made now. Nina's example of cruise ships, that was probably a decision that needed to be made now. There's probably not a lot of room for engagement on that. But where you put a park structure, what features or amenities are in that park structure, those are all things that we can take time on. And if we take time on it, we do it right. And when we do it right and we take time, I think that builds a sense of community. So
that sounds like something that we advocate all the time, that when you want to engage with your residents, you want to engage from the start to the end. People want to be involved in the design, in the progress, in all of those kind of decision making. But then at the end, they also want to know what you did with that input. And it sounds like that's something that you were just describing. Is that fair?
yeah, very fair. And I think, there's even a next step that we would want to take. I think, again, and I think you have to, I'll use the word scale. You have to scale the kind of engagement you want to deploy depending on the situation. The easy example is Nina's example with cruise ships. It's like, we know that there's a public health dilemma there. We know there's a public health challenge with them coming. That's an easy and quick decision that should be probably informed most predominantly by, in the case of the US, folks at the CDC, local health authorities, et cetera. But the far end of the spectrum is something that we've contemplated here in Guelph. We haven't yet done. A city in Canada that's pretty progressive in this regard is the city of Victoria, which is on the west coast, sort of Dylan's time zone. It's just outside of Vancouver as the major metropolitan area. It's called the city of Victoria. And they've employed something called citizen assemblies or citizen juries. It's a fascinating concept. It allows a citizen, a community and group to come together and decide on these things. So I think it runs the gamut. I think you're quite right, Matt, that you've got to engage beginning, middle, and end of the sort of decision-making cycle. But it also, you can scale up the level of or level of engagement that happens in each of those components based on the project. I guess what I would come back to is it takes a lot of really deliberative thought to think these things through. It takes effort, it takes energy, and it should be a deliberative process. It should be something where you're deliberately thinking about these things.
Yeah, and that just kind of underscores the importance of doing it now, because everybody's life has been turned upside down. So paying attention to where people's needs and priorities are right now is such a critical thing.